Hello, rhetorical scholars. Welcome to your first of several lessons on the rhetorical basics. Today we're going to start easy with diction, which is something I bet a lot of you have at least heard of, if not done some work with in other English classes. But hopefully you'll learn something a little bit new. This is all work that is adapted from the College Board's requirements for AP Language and Composition. So it's all stuff that will be important for you to know on the AP test, but it's also stuff that you should probably just know because you're all smart people and need to know how to write well. So let's get started. We'll start first with just a basic definition just to make sure we're all on the same page. So what is diction? Diction is when speaking or writing the deliberate choice of words to achieve a specific and nuanced purpose. So my best guess is if I had to say this is what you already know, that you've in other classes probably learned that diction is the deliberate choice of words. Word choice essentially is probably what you've heard other teachers say in the past. Maybe what they haven't said to you before, though, is that when you choose words, it's not just about choosing big or fancy words, but it's making sure to choose words that are going to achieve whatever purpose you have in mind for what you're writing or what you're saying. So if we're looking at the cartoon off on the left, we've got Calvin, and he's standing there and he says, "Here I am, happy and content, but not euphoric." And we'll stop there for just a second and kind of take a step back and say, okay, well, he's using three different words that essentially mean the same thing. Happy, content, euphoric. They all mean happy, right? But he goes on and says, so now I'm no longer content. I'm unhappy. My day is ruined, because he realized that he went a little bit too far with euphoric. So even though euphoric essentially means happy, he realizes that there's a little bit of nuance between being happy and being euphoric. And the fact that he's not euphoric then goes on to make him unhappy and to ruin his day. And then he says he has to stop thinking, which is funny. Sorry for ruining the joke. Uh, you know, but that's the essential idea here is that Calvin didn't carefully pick his words, and not carefully picking his words actually ruined the purpose of just being, happy with himself, being content with himself. And that can happen. So let's talk a little bit more about diction's rhetorical function then, this function of achieving a specific purpose. So there are essentially three rhetorical functions for diction. The first is that carefully considered diction is going to convey multiple layers of meaning to an audience. If we think about the cartoon again, um, we had three choices of words for happy, but each choice conveyed a slightly different sense of what happy meant. Content is, slightly more happy and it's slightly more self-fulfilling, right? Euphoric is that, showing your teeth, grinning ear to ear, feeling really good, self-satisfaction, but also just happy with the world around you, kind of happy. And so the audience, an aware audience is going to pick up on those multiple layers of meaning, and it's going to affect how they internalize your writing. Um, it's also going to appeal to multiple audiences. So you're going to know as you're choosing your words who you're speaking to, hopefully, or who you're writing for. And a lot of times you're writing for multiple people, and you want to pick words that are going to appeal to your broadest audience. Unless you know for sure that only one person is ever going to consume what you're reading or what you're speaking, then you are going to choose words that are going to mean have those layers of meaning for the types of people who will be consuming what you're writing or what you're saying. Finally, diction is also a good way for you to reveal your knowledge or your expertise on a subject. So it's a way that you can kind of, I guess you can school your audience a little bit. They can learn from you by when you use words that are slightly above their pay grade. They're still going to understand them, but they can learn from you. And so it can establish your knowledge or your expertise on the topic as well. So I do want you to be careful about a couple of things though. So when knowing this, you need to be cautious about poor diction. And poor diction can make your writing fall flat. In the case of a not well considered word, or words, every word counts, right? So even just one bad word can throw your audience off, and it can make your whole purpose crumble. Uh, Poor diction can also make you appear out of your depth, because if you're out of your depth, you're going to start using words like Calvin did, where, euphoric, oops, that wasn't quite right and I didn't accomplish what I wanted to accomplish. This is also where we run into the problem of what I call thesaurus alert, which I bet most of you have done before. I know I did it as a student, where you need to pick a better word, so you go to the thesaurus and you look for the fanciest word and you plop it in there because you think it makes you sound good. It's going to impress the teacher. It's going to impress whoever's reading your work. But that often sticks out like a sore thumb, and actually it becomes clear that you've used the wrong word because it's not a word that you either understand or not a word that you would normally use. So you have to make sure you're using words that fit with who you are as a speaker or as a writer. And then finally, it can work against your purpose. Again, in the case of Calvin, describing himself as euphoric, or realizing that using that word wasn't appropriate, actually worked against his purpose of wanting to be happy or wanting to be content with the world. And so you have to be careful not to go too far with your word choice, because that could throw off your purpose a little bit. Essentially, what you need to remember is that every word you choose carries meaning, especially in a class where we're talking about composing just the right sentence or just the right argument. You have to remember that every word counts, and every word could be a success or a failure. So let's quickly look at a couple of examples. So this example is we're going to start with this sentence. It was an emotional party, which has meaning, but not really. It's a bad sentence. Like, it doesn't tell us very much at all. We know that there was a party. We know that there were emotions with that party. We don't know what those emotions were. We don't know what kind of party it was. And good diction can tell us that. It can make us feel the emotions. It can make us sense the type of party we were at. So if we rewrite the sentence to say we attended, and there's a typo there, but we attended a heartrending gathering, then we get the sense by including the word attended and gathering, it feels a bit more formal. So it's probably, it's not a Friday night, no parents in town type party, right? And then heartrending tells us that it's probably kind of negative emotions. So we get the sense that this is a formal gathering of people who are in mourning or something along those lines. The essential meaning of the sentence is the same as the first one, but we get a lot more nuance out of it. Or we could rewrite the sentence this way. I just came back from a heartwarming get-together, and we notice that the diction is much more casual. It sets a much friendlier tone. We get the positive sense. I mean, heartwarming gives us that kind of positive sense that they enjoyed themselves at this party. And again, we have a rewrite that it means essentially the same thing as the first sentence, but there's a lot more nuance underneath the word choice there. Finally, let me show you one last example, and that is this one. Last night saw a frenetic fete, which means basically the same thing as the first sentence. There was an emotional party, but not many people are going to know what that means. And if most people are not going to write this sentence, and if they do write this sentence, most people are going to be out of their depth with it. So only a certain kind of person can write and get away with this sentence. And anybody else who writes it is probably going to be guilty of just trying to be fancier than they should have been. And this is an example of something you want to avoid. So now that you know a little bit more about diction, let's see how you can do with some practice.